But we also have to be willing to go back and learn the lessons again, learn them more deeply, see ourselves more carefully, more honestly. That's so essential to have that willingness to be there.
Welcome to Soror Mystica, a podcast exploring life's mysteries and magic through its symbols.
I'm Mariana Lewis, an archetypal tarotist.
And I'm astrologer Christina Farella.
And just as the Soror Mystica guided the alchemist through his holy work, we hope to be your mystic sisters in these conversations, guiding you deeper into the symbolic life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 16th episode of Soror Mystica. We are here today to talk about the symbol of the spiral. Mm-hmm. And before we do that, as always, I want to know, Mariana, what are you reading this week?
I'm reading nothing new, but I have an entire list of things to read. I think that what I'm going to pick up this week again, actually, is the Meditations on the Tarot book, which I started about 2 years ago, I think, and got, like, each time I pick it up, I think I get like 150 pages through. And then I'm like, okay, break.
Who is that by again? I forget.
It's anonymous.
Okay.
But people are pretty sure it's by Valentin Tomberg, probably. So, but he chose to be anonymous because that's not cool to be an occult philosopher. But yes, it is quite mighty and quite fascinating, and all about the tarot through the perspective of Christian Hermeticism, but also brings it into a very heady, though practical level of philosophical rumination. So it's like one of my favorite things I learned from this book, or considered, was that the whole purpose of the hermit is not to seek spiritual enlightenment, but to walk. It's about walking. It's about step by step by step, following the path that you only feel known to you from within. And I just love it. But each chapter is like 30 something pages and really dense and a lot. But I'm probably going to pick that up again this week and make my way through another 150 pages and then take another break for a year. I'm such a bad reader. Like, I really cannot finish things. I have like 6 books on my list right now.
When we're reading a long book, it's really, really easy to be like, this is a long-term investment. I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to take a break. And I don't know if I don't know what that is, but I've always read like that. So you're fine. You're doing the right thing. It's okay.
Thank you. Okay. So you tell me what you're reading now.
I'm reading Swan's Way. It is my big summer book, and I'm really excited because I've tried to read that, like just what you were saying. I've approached this book several times, and I never ever have the fortitude to get all the way through it. So I'm practicing the art of being responsible as a reader. And I'm trying to read at least 10 pages of it a day. And I say try, not that it's like a chore, but it is such a cozy book that it makes me very sleepy to read. Like, it just...
You get sleepy, yeah.
It opens with this like meditation of, going to bed as a child. And I mean, I'm obsessed with this because Proust was a Cancer, and the whole book is about like childhood nostalgia and like the smell of Madeleine cookies, and it's just so Cancerian. I actually found a book of his letters to his mom in the library recently, and I was just like peeing my pants because speaking of peeing your pants, he had like a lot of digestive issues, and he was always writing to his mom like, "Dear Mama, today my friends came to call," and he's like an adult. It's like, "Today my friends came to call, but I couldn't come out of bed because my stomach was bothering me again. Thanks for sending those pastries over.
Oh no.
I hope I see you at the party next week." It's just such baby time.
Poor guy had IBS.
He had some stuff going on and some, anxiety. Hey, listen, this is the world. So he is ultra Cancer in my brain. And so it was a good project to start in the middle of Cancer season, or the beginning of Cancer season. And I will update everyone as to my progress, because I really hope I finish it this time. I really want to. I really want to say I read it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you will, and I believe in you. I'm struggling so much with Dante. Like, I'm in the middle of the Purgatorio.
Yeah.
And I read an entire canto and then stop and then ask myself what happened, and I have no idea.
I know. I actually have a version of the Inferno where there are synopses at the end of each canto.
Oh yeah. It'll have a synopsis at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And this particular translation rhymes because they wanted to get his terza rima thing. Yes.
Yeah.
And but it makes it really weird English, like really, really weird. And it's very admirable, but very confusing. And I have just accepted that I am going to understand half of this, like literally just understand half of the sentences, and then one day go back and try it again and just allow myself to struggle through it, because it's really interesting when I get what the hell is going on. And most of the time I'm like, what is this sentence? I don't understand.
Having the right translation is so important. And, before we hopped on this call and I was yelling at you about Swan's Way, I was like, read the Lydia Davis translation, because there is, I forget the name of the man who translated Swan's Way. That's like the classic, everybody has read it and it's very cherished. And then this Lydia Davis translation came out, like it's very contemporary, but she is she's done, I think, such an excellent job, and it makes it a lot more lively and a little bit more relatable than the classic one. And so the same thing goes for the translation of the Inferno that I have. It is not rhyming. It doesn't pretend to try to capture any of that. It's just kind of like blank verse poetry that you're reading through. And I really, really like that. And I wish I could remember the name of the translator off the top of my head, but I can't. It's in my living room. It's somewhere else.
This is the one recommended to me by the teacher of the Dante class I'm in. So I was like, I'll just do that. And I feel the same way about like Rilke's poetry. Stephen Mitchell, his translations of Rilke is pure magic. And when I read anybody else's translations of Rilke, I'm like, who is this terrible poet? I don't get it. And it's just Stephen Mitchell. He like freaking understood Rilke and he did a perfect job. So
yeah, translation is so intense. Do you know what I learned recently?
Yeah.
I compulsively taught myself ancient Greek when we were in grad school, like one summer, because I was being insane. And I made these Sappho translations, and I was really, really proud of them.
Doing that, yeah.
The website where they were published is now gone, which I find strange because they're published by the Brooklyn Rail, which still exists, but they had a translation wing of their website, and it's disappeared, and it's been like that for months. So now I have to write to them and be like, hello, what's going on here?
That's so sad.
Yeah, and they don't have an editor to write. They're just like, write to the people who govern the magazine. And it's like, I'll be writing to Anselm Berrigan, who is like a big deal. He's not going to answer my email about where my poems went. So I'm bummed about that. So anyway, here's my sad tale, everyone.
I'm sorry.
I translated Sappho and now no one can see it on the internet, but I can email them to you.
Well, you should translate it and publish it. This is my take, because your poetry is great and your love of Sappho is great, and combine the two and magic, perfection.
Yep. She's just so important to my soul. So we love it. Love the Sapphics. Okay, so speaking of approaching things, not understanding them, leaving them, and coming back, let's think about spirals.
Wow, look what you did there.
I just did something fancy. So the symbol of the spiral is exactly what we have kind of been talking about a little bit, of like the attempt to approach something, the kind of moving around it, and then feeling completely lost and spun out of orbit, and then having to come back when we're ready again.
Yeah.
And so the spiral is obviously a shape. But the spiral, like all of the symbols that we contend with on this show, has a very, very rich set of archetypal meanings, in not only in art or in like a shamanistic culture or in, painting or the use of language. It has so much to do as well with the cultivation of our own individuation. The cycles of the planets to me feel spiralitic. So I'm excited to talk about this today because I don't know, I really like these symbols that are just like a concrete image and thinking about where they show up. So I'm going to read a little bit from my symbols book just to get us started because there's just so much weird stuff in the spiral entry. I was really surprised at how long it is. Some of these entries are like a paragraph and then others go on forever. So, okay, so a spiral, right? So it's defined as a highly complex symbol which has been used since Paleolithic times and appears in pre-dynastic Egypt, Crete, Mycenae, Mesopotamia, India, China, Japan, pre-Columbian America, Europe, Scandinavia, and Britain. It also appears in Oceania, but not in Hawaii. I think that's really interesting.
Just really interesting.
Yeah. I love the oceanic art room at the Metropolitan Museum.
It's so good.
So crazy. It variously represents both solar and lunar powers, the air, the waters, rolling thunder, and lightning. It is also a vortex, the great creative force, emanation. So waxing and waning, expanding and contraction, growth and decay, birth and death. I'm kind of paraphrasing here. The revolving course of the heavens, the sun, the cyclic seasons, the rotation of the earth. And so I think that I'm just looking here. It talks about the androgyne, the caduceus, and in our last episode, we actually talked about the caduceus, which is the symbol of the staff that Hermes or the psychopomp carries. So go back and listen to that. Also, the solve et coagula of alchemy. Maybe if you feel like expanding on that as our alchemist here, can represent flame and fire. It's heliacal, so snail shells, seashells, the ear, animal horns that curve, and different kinds of ferns, right? So there's so much nature imagery.
So much,
the rose is something that comes to mind, or like the center of a sunflower. Anyway, obviously I love shapes. So here we are. We're going to talk about spirals.
Well, I want to add on to your symbols book and raise you my symbols book.
Wow.
Which has also some very beautiful things to say about it. And it says, the spiral is the path that resolves conflict, allowing for balanced movement and natural unfolding. Thus, harmonious transformation can proceed. These spiral processes in nature form a language evoking the mythic journey, regeneration, and awakening as fronds and flowers whirl open to the light by ascending to a higher rung. Mirroring the way of the wind and the whirling galaxies, spirals describe a path of travel not only of shamans, genii, and spirits, but also psychological development in general, as if the inner development repeatedly comes round to the same point again, but at a different level. And I think that this is, I really love that we're dedicating an entire episode to spirals because I think that they are at the center of nature. One of the things that this book suggests is that this is the most common shape that we actually encounter in nature. And it is this central image of nature and the central image of our experience of our own psyche. And I think that it is, we don't think of it that way, but it really, really is.
Yeah. I'm like thinking about the Fibonacci sequence. Like that's the sacred spiral that we find in nature over and over again. And I think that what's funny is when we're feeling like we don't know what's going on, sometimes we say, I'm spiraling. Like I'm spiraling out of control. I'm losing it. And I say this to you all the time because I love to lose my mind. So I'm always saying I'm spiraling and it's fine. But what actually I would like to reframe for maybe myself and for others listening who also feel like they spiral is that, you know, we think of the spiral as the loss of control because the spiral is like, you know, we're kind of getting away from maybe the center of something. But what these definitions of spiral that we've shared suggest is that it's actually the opposite, is that we're always kind of orbiting that central core point and we have different moments of proximity and distance from it, depending on where we are at in our own cyclic journey. So I love the idea of our journeys being spiralitic rather than cyclic or like even teleological from start to finish. We're not here to be born, to grow up, and then to die. We're here to kind of have this spiral experience with consciousness and the soul. And so I think that that's something that if we can root or if we can find the spiral in nature so many times over, we can find ourselves within nature as well, which is always super important to me. And yeah, thinking of like whirlpools and tornadoes
Mm,
or like the galaxies, it feels very destructive, like where we lose control when we disperse energy through the spiral.
yeah.
But I think that there is that central point to it always, right?
I really like that idea of how we feel like we lose control when the energy is dispersed. I think that's really good because the bringing up the phrase "I'm spiraling" is so interesting because there is this feeling of kind of like the body or the experience just sort of being spun around and we don't really have anything to grab onto, but we're still on the same pattern. We don't actually leave the pattern. And so there is this feeling of the energy being pulled out enough from the center that it feels dispersed and it feels uncontrollable, but there is a gravity right at the center that doesn't allow for it to completely fall apart and completely dissipate. I think that is a central experience of the spiral, is that we kind of feel like we're detached, but we're not. We're always in the gravitational
Mm-hmm.
rotation.
Mm-hmm.
I whenever I think of the term spiral or the idea of the spiral, I always think of Marion Woodman, who is my favorite Jungian. That sounds like the name of a podcast. My favorite Jungian.
It does.
Um, um, she is so wonderful. If you haven't heard of Marion Woodman, go hear about her. She's really good. And she is the first person I at least ever encountered of describing the path of individuation as a spiral. And I have this quote of hers that comes from some lecture she gave at the University of Toronto, where she says, "Hold that place, that still point between the tension of the opposites. It's the central core that holds the spiritual power. You never, never come back to the same place. Avoid compulsive repetition. Life is not a circle, but a spiral around a central place, and we are working our way up and working our way down." And that is the work of the individuation journey. And when we're talking about the individuation journey, that's just a very ridiculously fancy way of saying the work of being who you are and becoming yourself and feeling like you're living into yourself. It is not something that we do step by step. And this is really, really important. The work of individuation, the work of living, of being who we are, becoming, it is not linear. And this is something that Marion Woodman pointed to over and over and over again in her work. This is not linear. This is not linear. And yet, when you read Jung or you read Freud or you read any of these psychological, the forefathers of psychology, they seem to talk about the process as if we can get somewhere, right? That we will, figure out this complex and then heal that and then do this. And then you will get to the end point where you are whole. There you are, and you figured it all out. And Marion Woodman was like, this is a very masculine orientation to the work of step by step by step. Progress is always the goal. We can get somewhere. And so we think of things in a straight line as a ladder. And she was very adamant that we need to stop thinking about our inner development as a ladder and start thinking of it as this spiral where we're moving up and down and backwards and forwards, and we're always rotating around the same center of who we are and discovering new things. She often said that whenever we feel like we've returned to the same thing, and I hear my clients say this all the time, you hear people
Same.
say this
Yeah.
all the time, like, oh, I thought I worked through this, or I've already done that, or I've had that experience already, and I've messed that up before. And they're like, why am I back here? And she would always say, you're not back there. You're in a different vantage point at the same point in the spiral. And so you have to now approach that through this different vantage point and ask, what do I know more now that I didn't know before? What do I have forgotten that I did know before? Because that's possible too.
Yeah.
And I think that's so essential when we're thinking about the spiral.
I love the simultaneity of experience that the spiral kind of lays bare or reminds us of or insists upon. And, since I mean, with the tarot, you're definitely helping people key in with their cyclic experiences. But as an astrologer, I'm literally helping people track their cycles. And it's like a reading that I offer and stuff like that. And I think that what is always frustrating to people is like, well, when is this cycle going to end? When is this going to change for me? And how long do I have to endure this set of experiences? And, you know, I feel that way too all the time. Like we all, I'm not saying I'm so wise, but there is like no, it's a hard question to answer if you're being honest, because once you kind of move out of one version of your cyclic experiences in astrology, you're keyed into another one that lets you maybe pull from the wisdom that you learned in that previous part of the spiral and bring it into the new iteration of self. So there's just this interesting way that I think for those of you who study astrology in particular, or are learning your chart, or are learning how to read transits, remembering that, yes, when we come back around to these places in our chart due to the planetary cycles, we're not starting from scratch. We're always using the wisdom of what we learned prior. And I think like a great example of this for those of you who are tracking Venus retrograde, right? We are going to have a Venus retrograde on July 23rd, starting this summer. She'll be going retrograde in Leo. The last time she was retrograde in Leo was 2015 in the summer. So that's interesting on so many levels, just as like a tidbit of information, looking back to see where you were in 2015 in terms of the Leo part of your chart, what was going on for you back then. You're now picking up that thread with the wisdom and the Venusian knowledge that you've accumulated since 2015, and you're moving forward with that piece of the spiral story. So I think that that's something that I really try to reframe for people. It's like, well, it's not going to be over because you carry it with you. Right. And like the image of, the snail feels very resonant too. It's like, you're always kind of carrying the spiral. We're just like little snail babies, and we're just moving in the spiral as we move through, our experiences. So yeah, I love that idea of like the individuation process being the spiral that goes up and down and side to side at the same time.
Yeah, I think that this point of especially astrology is such a vital example of it, because the planets in the signs, everything literally does the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. We will always have a Capricorn new moon, and we will always have Mercury going into this around this time. Like these things, they just repeat. And it's so interesting to hear people, you know, I'm sure you get this with clients all the time. I see people on Instagram say this all the time of like, you know, oh God, I just need to get through this such and such transit. And we have the orientation of it of like, and then I'll be fine. And then like, it'll be done. And yet we know it's going to come back in like 7 years. Or next week or whatever's going on.
Tomorrow. The best example of this was like getting through my Saturn return, maybe our Saturn returns together. We were like, okay, you know, we're the same age. We were doing it basically the same time. I'm like 2 months older than you, actually.
I know, you're older.
Getting through the Saturn return was like, okay, you know, I was thinking about it back then, like, got to get through it. And then I'll be wise. And then I won't be broke and scared and upset and hounded by my thesis, dissertation director who was so mean to me. But no, like you get through it. And then there is this feeling of, okay, now what? Like, the complexity still exists. How are you going to use the lesson to further yourself now?
Right. And then Mars is doing something, and then you're passing, then Chiron is doing something, and then all these things are doing something. And I think that this is the lesson we don't always get, that astrology in particular really, really tries to teach us, which is you're going to be here again. You're going to be here again really soon, sooner than you want to. How are you going to manage that? And I think that I see this all the time with my clients in tarot, is that they always seem to want the happy ending, right? And it's really difficult, obviously, as a tarot reader. I just did a reading for somebody the other day where they had a couple tough cards, but generally it was pretty positive, pretty hopeful. And then one of the final cards they got was the 9 of Swords inverted. And I was like, okay, you know, pointing to like, where's the energy going? And I don't like to say things like, wow, this is gonna suck. Like it's never fun as a tarot reader to have a card like that show up right at the end, to point to what to look forward to. But at the same time, I was like, where do we think it's going based on the other cards that are here and based on the experiences you've had? This is the Nine of Swords. The client was like, yeah, I know that experience. I know it really well. I've been there before. And I'm like, yeah, and you're going to be there again, because this is how life works. And not everybody resists it. That client didn't resist it. They accepted it with a lot of grace. But I do get that a lot, where they're like, no thanks, I don't want it, I'm scared of it. The Wheel of Fortune, perfect example. Wheel of Fortune tells us people get really excited when they see the Wheel of Fortune come up, because they're like, oh, I'm gonna have some good luck. And I am always like very suspicious, because it's like, yes, and then bad. And then we go back and we move all the time. But when we think of things, as you were saying at the beginning, when we think of things as being cyclic, there's power in the cycle. There's power in knowing what's coming next and knowing how to move in rhythms with yourself. But there is a greater sense of reflection possible when we think of it being spiralitic rather than cyclic, because then it says, yes, I will go through this really difficult transit or this really difficult experience with, someone I love or whatever. But I am not going to be the same exact person I was last time. I'm going to have the new vantage point of, what do I love more? What am I more devoted to in my life? Where do I need to have better boundaries? And as I said before too, we can also go backwards. What have I forgotten that I learned last time that I really need to remember now? That's one of the things I see the Wheel of Fortune inverted come up as a lot. It's like, yeah, we're doing something over again, but what did you forget that you got last time?
Right.
That's probably very useful right now. So I think that this is something that in general as a society, I think that we need to just shift our orientation. I think that we still, even us spiritual witchy souls, still think of things as a ladder. We're still all climbing towards the 10 of Cups with the rainbow and the happy ending. And it doesn't exist. It only exists in brief little glimmers and moments, and we can catch it if we're receptive enough. But we also have to be willing to go back and learn the lessons again, learn them more deeply, see ourselves more carefully, more honestly. That's so essential, to have that willingness to be there.
Yeah, I agree completely. And when I think about, as we're kind of holding ourselves to just contemplate this shape, this symbol, it's just about becoming, and the becomingness emanates out from the center, and we're never not in relationship to the center. At any point in the spiral cycle, you're still some space away from this central, like centrifugal point in the spiral's center. Something else that, came up as we were chatting before, was thinking about the spiral as sometimes related to the labyrinth or the maze, right? And so in our most famous labyrinth story in myth, we have the Minotaur, who is at the center of the labyrinth, who, needs to be slayed by the hero. And it's just, I have so many questions about the Minotaur, whose actual name was like Astraea or Astraeus or something. It means like the starry one. There's something in the Minotaur. Maybe we should do a Minotaur show. But anyway,
we should go interview the Minotaur.
I feel bad for the Minotaur, but the idea of like the monster at the center of the maze, I think is a psychological or depths psych kind of treasure trove of the shadow at the center of the spiral. I don't know if I always believe that there's like this monster thingy at the center of
it's something to be redeemed. It's about the redemption, I think, at least.
Yeah. So I think that the idea of becoming, like what you said before too, about even those of us who are oriented to living a life that is influenced by the occult or by the arts or by, understanding ourselves and healing and all that stuff, we still see it as this progress oriented, the clock is ticking because of the culture that we live in. But what I think is so exciting is that we have to remember that the spiral is in the foundational components of like the earth and nature. It's the shape that flowers bloom in for the most part. And it's the shape of like unfurling that, not that what's to say that like what's natural is always bad. You know, I'm not taking us down that road, but there's something essential about that shape and about that energetic form that says, okay, from the center we unfurl, and there is not a kind of beginning, middle, and end of this shape. It is about being in that cyclic space. So I think that, you know, remembering that and our orientation to where we are in that journey can be really, really healing and really calming and soothing. I'm trying to think, are there spirals in the tarot itself, like as a shape? I don't think so.
No, not really. There's like the infinity sign that comes up twice.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's circles.
Right. Obviously the Wheel of Fortune you were just talking about. The world is a circle.
It's a mandorla technically, but it's circular, almondish.
Mm-hmm. Is that what that is? Mandorla?
It's called a mandorla.
Weird.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that a weird word? And it's also the shape of the wound of Christ, which is maybe labia.
Oh.
Have you ever seen the medieval pictures of the wound of Christ? There'll just be these enormous pictures of the wound of Christ where he was like stabbed in the side.
Yeah.
And so they'll just draw these enormous like images of this, and it's always like red and pink and like layered, and it looks like vulva.
Jeez, that is just wild. That is just wild. Yeah. I can't. My brain just broke. I remember. Speaking of drawings of the wounds of Christ, I found this like trove of drawings that I made as a kid of Jesus with the stigmata, where he's like showing people his stigmata, and there's like blood coming. I think I had to do it for CCD or something. I had to do it for
maybe you
homework.
watched the movie Stigmata.
No, I didn't. No, okay. I was just very afraid of the stigmata. And
it's
so
scary.
Those stories where he's like showing Thomas his stigmata and stuff, I was like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
Anyway.
I would check myself for that sometimes. I was like convinced that one day I'd wake up with a stigmata and I'd be like, I'm a saint. I must go to the Pope and show.
And so you have a spiralitic relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, this was my 7-year-old brain being like, this is what you do. You get that when you're cool, when you're a cool guy. Very silly, very silly. But yeah, there's a lot. There's no real spirals in the tarot, but I think that the major arcana feels very spiralitic, just in general. Yeah. Someone asked me, a student asked me recently, is like, what do I do with, pulling, I don't know, like the Tower card, for example, and being like, okay, this is the moment in my life where I am breaking down my ego control and allowing my life to shatter and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And then I pull it again in 3 weeks. Right. Like, how do I make sense of that? Because like I just went through that, but now it's back again. And I it's a good question. And the thing is, like, with the major arcana, my tarot theory is that it is a sequence, that they go in sequence, that the sequence is really important. It tells a story, but we don't live in sequence. Right. We don't live in this very formulaic plot. Our lives are surprising. And so we find ourselves at different points. I really like to bring in the sequence when I'm, if I pull the Tower, I think, okay, behind me may be the devil, ahead of me may be the star. That gives me something to deepen this. But we can find ourselves at any point on that spiral in the inner work. It does not work step by step. That gets back into our linear thinking, our ladder thinking. And so when we're working with the tarot and we see this very clear development from the magician who first creates the world and creates the world he knows, the life he knows, to the world that allows all of the things to be present at one time, then the fool who is living completely authentically, we see that it's a very clear story there. And yet we can be with the Moon card, and then all of a sudden with the Empress, and then all of a sudden with the Chariot, and find ourselves having these things happen to us. We have our myths because they show us that this is how life tends to go. And I think that that's one of the things I like to do with the tarot, is to see it in groups, in clumps. and we have the numbers 1 through 6, we find these like primordial powers within ourselves of logos and eros and nature versus order and all these things. And then we have the development of the ego with the chariot through the justice card. And then we have the destruction of the ego from the hangman to the tower. And then we have the ability to kind of really reunite with our most essential experience of ourselves, our transcendent selves, with the star through the fool. And so I think that chunking it like that helps us understand how this process goes. But we also can be back and forth all the time, and we're never just in one place. And I think that that makes it okay to feel like we're crazy, like we're spiraling. Like that's a really good actually phrase for that, because we're in all these different places at once, and experiencing them and learning about ourselves, and but also never at the same place again. Really, we're never at the same place again.
Yes, totally. I love your perspective with the cards of like breaking them down into these units rather than seeing them as individual, just random pieces of the story.
Yeah.
And that's actually shifted so much of how I read the cards for myself. So I'm always, your way of presenting, like, if we pull a pip card, thinking about what comes before and after it, as well as what suit it's of and what the actual symbols of that card are, is immensely helpful in terms of orienting oneself in, that spiral cycle thing. So, that's the beauty of one of the beauties of your approach.
Thank you. I think that the as you said, the pip cards, they also have that spiralitic motion, because it looks very sequential. Because the tens all show us the happy ending or the tragic ending,
right?
But they all go right back to the ace. Like the only answer for all those tens is to return to the ace, and so we're always just spiraling around the same story.
It's very much similar to how the planets move around our natal charts, and every single year of your life, you're going to have, the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars activating your chart in their own cyclic way, we say. But everything goes retrograde except for the sun and the moon. The north and south node are usually retrograde. Asteroids will station retrograde, and actually, that's what keeps us from feeling like we are completing a true cycle over and over again, is the fact that these retrograde stations wind up tugging us back like an undertow back into the ocean, and thinking about what it is to disrupt the expectation that things move forward in terms of the teleological beginning, middle, and end, is the power of looking at life through the retrograde cycle or the spiral motion around the chart, because we are not here to just push forward. That's, again, a lie of late capitalism, that we have
honestly,
this ladder to climb. That is not the point of living. And a lot of us have to first unpack that expectation and soothe it and put it to bed before we can really start knowing ourselves, in my opinion. Breaking free of that expectation is like a huge thing.
Well, you said so many good things. I think that, first of all, that's a statement for all of time. What did you say? The breaking down the teleological orientation to beginning, middle, and oh my God, I'm gonna have to listen to that back because that was really good. That's a quote. But yeah, I think that it's pre-capitalism. It's just patriarchy in and of itself. Patriarchy is progress, and I think that is a very, very core paradigm. I'm going to get on a soapbox here, but a core paradigm that all of us can take a very close look at. This is one of the things that is really pointed to in Faust, in Goethe's Faust, is that Faust represents the patriarchal hero. He represents the hero of the man, right? The everyman. And his whole thing is progress, progress, progress. What is next? That is always the question. And in order to continue to progress, to make progress, he has to have new experiences. He has to do new things. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger each time, to the point where he tries to conquer the land back from the sea. And it is so hubristic of him to think I can conquer the sea.
Mm.
And, eventually it leads to his demise, and yet he's still redeemed. And I think that this is something for all of us to think about, is if we can make this shift within ourselves, if we can really start to think of it this way, of saying it's not about progress, it's about presence with myself on the spiral, then we actually, relieve ourselves of this burden and this weight that we've been oppressed with for a really, really long time, for thousands of years, but through the last 100 or so years or a couple hundred years with the capitalist mentality, that has really made it unbearable in a very literal way, in like a very daily lived way. And I think that it's shifting. I feel it shifting. I think people are starting to do that. This is something that I had to think about in my own business. I, did a lot of great things this past year that were so amazing to me. Like, I felt so fulfilled by them. And I hit this point where I was like, okay, and then what next? And I spent a lot of time thinking about what next. And then I was like, why what next?
We would say that to each other. We'd be like, I just don't know what's next. And it
What
would
next?
just be so upsetting. Yeah.
And I was like, I'm okay right now. I love what I'm doing. It feels really good. I'm not like hustling to like make rent. I feel comfortable. So then let it be. And that doesn't mean you can't have ambition and can't want the next thing. That's a different thing where you're like, okay, this feels like the right time to move on. But we don't have to what next all the time. It doesn't have to be about progress. We can say, I'm staying where I am, or I'm moving around this spiral and just learning more and more and more about who I am and finding more presence in this experience.
It's beautiful. I love that so much. And I think that, the way that you were describing Faust's search for what's next in that very progress-oriented way, eventually, I think like trying to, what is it? Drive back the land from the sea. What is the phrase? That's so crazy.
Yeah.
So obviously there's like a masculine, feminine duality thing that's happening there. And that is, I think, what happens to us when we do keep pushing on the straight line, when we keep pushing on expecting things to fall in an order that makes sense or is rational. And I'm putting air quotes around those in my office here, but like, it is so patriarchal. And that reminds me too that the spiral is also associated with the image of the omphalos, which is the navel or the center point of anything. And I think in our previous mountains episode, we kind of talked about the omphalos a little bit. And I'll just to, if you haven't listened to that one yet, the omphalos was something, it's a Greek word. And I believe it just means like in the center of, or it means navel or something like that. And of course, the navel being so important because it's the place where the mother is connected to the child from the umbilical cord, right? From our our bodies. And so the Greeks believed that, when they built their temple to Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, who was so important for survival, they decided that her temple space at Delphi was the omphalos, the center of the world. And so to me, omphalos always has this feminine quality to it of Vesta or the Great Mother, or just the nurture of the cycles of nature, which are very, very, again, divorced from our reality. I think we're doing a good job of calling those back into being as we continue in this particular era of like cultivating awareness, maybe in the US or in the West or whatever, but it's still something that we have to kind of fight to not reclaim, but just like bring back in and have comfort with and be okay with, okay, my life doesn't look like high school, college, grad school, marriage, babies, whatever. Like, no, so many of our stories look like the exact opposite of that, or an exploded, rearranged version of that, because life is very complicated. And a lot of people will bring into my sessions pain and discomfort with the fact that life's not working out the way that they expected it to. And so working with a tool like the tarot or like astrology, or having a creative practice reminds us that we actually deserve to be in relationship with the spiral itself, right? Instead of what society tells us is the progress route that we're supposed to follow. So, yeah.
I think that is so gorgeous, and I think that's the perfect place to wrap up our little spiral discussion and move on to some symbols.
All right, I'm ready.
If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to leave a review or learn more about how you can support us on Patreon, where you can get access to some exciting exclusive offerings. Or you can connect with us by sharing a symbolic experience, whether from a dream or synchronicity, for us to explore on the show. Thank you to today's sharer, and please tell us your symbolic experience or connect with us on our website, sorormysticapodcast.com.
Are you a small business looking to reach a targeted audience of people interested in all things esoteric? If this sounds like you, Soror Mystica would love to invite you to become an ad partner. We offer a highly tailored audience of mindful, curious, depth-seeking listeners, and we would be delighted to showcase your business and offerings to new hearts and new minds. Simply fill out an advertiser application form at our website, linked in the show notes below, or navigate to sorormysticapodcast.com/advertise with us.
Moon Magic is a spiritual wellness center located in northern New Jersey, and owner Karen Foote is a spiritual intuitive healer whose passion is to empower her clients by connecting them to their authentic selves. She offers distance healing sessions, which incorporate Reiki healing combined with a chakra reading report, crystal healing, and oracle card reading. Her in-person sessions include all of that, plus hands-on Reiki, massage, and craniosacral therapy. I don't know about you, but this all sounds so delightful to me, so make sure you check out her offerings at moonmagicwellness.com.
Astrology is a language based on the names of the gods of Roman mythology. We often are encouraged to bring a mythic perspective to astrology as we take the names of the planets to represent their god forms, but it can be really daunting to know where to turn, what stories are important, what images pertain to each of these figures, and how do we weave that into an astrology reading, which is already quite complex. Join me beginning July 26th for a new class called Mythology for Astrologers, which will be a 4-week immersion into the exact stories, images, and sacred symbols of the 12 signs of the zodiac and the 7 traditional planets of your natal chart. You can find all information about registering for this course in the link in our show notes, and I can't wait to see you in class. Okay, everyone, so today, instead of reading a listener symbol, I'm going to present 2 dreams, and we're going to talk about the symbol that emerges in both of them. So thank you for listening to my dreams. I have a lot of dreams, as we all do. And
great dreams.
They're very bossy. And so recently I'm waiting. So I've had 2 dreams. I'm waiting for the third because I learned that from Mariana, that's what you have to do. So the first dream is that I dreamt that I was in a house and I approached a wall that was made of wooden kind of slats, like just kind of nailed into the wall, kind of bare bones, maybe like log cabin sort of style looking wall, very rough. And into that wall was cut a big door. And I reached for the handle, which was really a latch, to lift it up, almost like a barn door or something. And as soon as I lifted it up, all these dog snouts poked out of it and were like snuffling around and growling and barking. And I was like, oh God, no. And I closed the door and I woke up and I was like, I'm not touching that. The second dream that I had about a door was pretty quick succession, maybe within the week, of me climbing a set of stairs to an old house. And honestly, it kind of looked like your sister's house. It was
really?
like a big, one of those big old houses in Queens or Brooklyn or something. But the stairs going up to it were really like tall cement stairs, kind of ugly. And so I get to the porch, was a big porch, like your sister's porch. And I get to the door and I know I'm supposed to open the door, but I hear voices on the other side and I'm like, oh, I'm scared. I don't want to open this door. And then I walk back down the stairs. And as I'm walking back down the stairs, the wind picks me up and places me back at the top.
My favorite part of this dream.
And then I'm at the top of the staircase and I'm like, I guess I have to open the door. And I open it up. And then actually, this is so interesting in light of till we have faces. I walked into this house and it was kind of a dark bar inside and people were just kind of hanging out, but no one had a face. I couldn't see anybody's face. And so this was my second door oriented dream. And then I woke up. So
Wow.
tell me, oh dream reader, what you think? Because I mean, it's a little bit obvious. Like, okay, Christina, you're afraid of walking through the door.
Get through that door. Yeah, I mean, go through the door. That's right there. I love that the wind picked you up. It feels very mythological. It feels like Zephyr himself came and was like, let's go. You got to be here. I also think that there's, on both dreams, you see something on the other side of the door, but can't really make sense of it. The first time it's dog snouts. You don't see it doesn't really seem like you see the full dogs either.
No, I just kind of like, know that they're very hairy. They're kind of like wolves, but they're dogs. Yeah.
And then the second time, it's not as scary. There's not something that's going to rip you to shreds and attack you, but they're not completely human, or there's no face. There's nothing to like look at and understand. That's so interesting.
It's crazy. And so isn't that the line though from Till We Have Faces, where she says at the end, she's like, are we to wait to meet the gods until we have faces, or something like that? Which is such a strange thing to say. So yeah, the concept of like seeing and sight and not seeing or perceiving but not being able to fully perceive are qualities of these two dreams.
Yeah.
And, you know, obviously dreams are deeply personal, but like I think that the concept of the threshold and passing through,
the threshold
is what's important.
That was the thing that you know struck me about those dreams, was that on both of them you're approaching the threshold. So you have to make the progress up to the threshold, and when you get there, that's when you start to, the dream ego starts to lose courage. There's a moment of fear that prevents you from doing it, and yet both times you do it. The first time you do it and then immediately close it. So the dream ego says, I will cross through the threshold. And then it's like, nope, I don't have whatever it takes to be able to fight this or to withstand whatever's going to attack me or harm me. And then the second time, you don't even bother to go. You're just like, I'm too afraid of what's on the other side. And then you have to be pushed into it. I'm thinking a little bit of our psychopump conversation too, of like being brought to the liminal space, and which a threshold is the liminal space between experiences. The house also is symbolically, you know, the psyche, the structure of the psyche, and you're on the outside of it. So there's something there probably about understanding the inner workings of your own psyche and your own experience that feels a little bit frightening and overwhelming to the dream ego.
I know. I have to do some active dream work with this. And I think that maybe it's been a while since I've had these two door dreams. And so for those of you listening, if you have a recurring symbol that comes up, and it doesn't have to be twice and you're looking for a third, but if it keeps happening, but you still keep feeling mystified as to the qualities of it, you can take that symbol with you into lucid dream practice or automatic writing practice or something. Active imagination. So I think that that's what I need to do. But I do think that there is this question of like, why is what's on the other side frightening me? And why didn't the people that I was about to meet have faces? Right. And so,
do you have any idea who they were?
No, I don't. They were strangers. It wasn't like, oh, there's like my mom and my aunt, but they don't have faces. It was just kind of like I was in a bar, like in New York or something. It was just like dimly lit and people were sitting around and
And what was the feeling you had?
I felt alarmed that I couldn't see. And I felt at first like I couldn't see their faces because my eyes were adjusting from the bright light outside. And I was like, oh, it's like when you go inside and you're a kid and it's summertime and you can't see for a minute. That was my idea in my dream. But then I realized like, no, I really can't see these people's faces. So it was a little bit, and I think I said to them, I can't see you. So yeah, it's definitely like, who is that? And
were they waiting for you?
Not necessarily. They kind of looked like it was cool that I was there. They were just like, oh yeah, someone else has walked in, but it wasn't like I wasn't crossing a boundary by going in, and I wasn't exactly welcomed either. It was just like, yep, hey.
Interesting. Sometimes when we have these dreams and we're a little bit confused about the symbol, the way to enter is to say, well, how did I feel? What were the subtleties that are hard to verbalize? Like, did I feel welcomed or not unwelcomed or whatever?
Yeah.
I definitely think that there is something even in the few days between those two dreams that progressed, right? Between this is too scary, this is going to rip me apart, to it just doesn't really, there's just not welcome there yet. Not that they're keeping you out, but it's just kind of like, I don't know, we're not going to show ourselves to you just yet. So I would definitely question, as you said, the shifting of the sight, right? To saying I'm consciousness, the bright light of the daytime being representative of your consciousness, right? And going in and being like, I can't actually see what's in this darkness. It's in the unconscious space, more unconscious space, because I'm still kind of grabbing onto this conscious mind orientation. So maybe wait for the third one, but these were already a little bit like a couple weeks ago, right? Or maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, I have to look back to when I texted you about them, which is a great record to have.
That is the historical records of our lives, is everyone, when we text each other.
Have a friend that you compulsively tell everything to, and you can have
I'll never forget anything.
Seamless callback. Yeah, they were spaced out, but it's been longer since then, like from my second dream, that I, the other thing about both of these, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I think I'm right, is that both of them were dreams that I had during the day. Like I took a nap, which
interesting.
I never do. And I was napping I'm sure I was just, I don't know, exhausted. So I was napping during the middle of the day, and I had these dreams. And so I've had middle of the day dreams only if I've done acupuncture and like I've fallen asleep on the table or something.
Yeah. I would say, as you do active imagination with the door. See if you can go in and see what's waiting for you on the other side now, and then maybe you'll complete the triad.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, this is good. So doors in the threshold. Question: doors in the threshold. You obviously got to walk into something that feels like you really got to do it. The wind is telling you. Get here.
I know.
Open this door.
I'm sorry, wind. I'm trying.
You're doing great. All right. So as always, go leave a review for us on wherever you listen to your podcasts. Share a symbol with us if you have one.
And I think that we have one more day of registration for the Mythology for Astrologers class that I'm offering. Yeah. So if you haven't checked that out and you're looking for a way to just learn the symbols and stories that you need to know in order to bring mythology into your astrology learning, please join me for this 4-week exploration. It's going to be really, really fun.
It's going to be delicious. So go do it. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us in our conversation today.
Please consider supporting the podcast by leaving a review and following Soror Mystica wherever you listen.
You can also become a more active supporter and a member of the Soror Mystica community by joining our Patreon.
If you have a symbolic experience that you'd like to share with us for the podcast, you can tell us all about it at sorormysticapodcast.com.
The music for this podcast is written and performed by me, Mariana Lewis, with special thanks to Stefan Lewis. You can connect with both Christina and myself on Instagram and get to know our work by clicking on the links in the show notes.
As the alchemical motto goes, as above, so below, as within, so without.
May this ancient wisdom continue to guide you deeper.
Until next time, take good care.